let's get the don't list. Let's get, and this is kind of shorter. But I think one of the big things you really don't want to do is you don't want to disempower your community. You don't want to take away, um, you don't want to make them feel powerless. Like there's nothing worse than, like, a lot of people kind of feel very powerless in their daily lives, and like especially games, like there's a lot of kind of like wish fulfillment or fantasy fulfillment, but not to find a point on it. When I play, Final Fantasy 14, I am the warrior of light that saves worlds and destroys primals and does all this stuff. And so you don't necessarily want the community to basically make somebody feel powerless. And I mean, this isn't, and again, like there's this fine line because you don't want to, give people the power to, do anything, because you know, if you feel powerless, that can be mitigated by, being feel like you're being taken care of. Think about kids. Like, kids have a lot less freedom, power, and than adults do, but kids have someone, generally have someone that kind of looks after them, parents, guardians, and whatnot.
Ideally.
So basically, there's kind of that trade off. If you disempower someone and you're not taking care of them, that's the worst feeling possible. So basically, you do, like, from a community management point of view, you really want to basically make sure that you are, uh, 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 protecting people, because people want that sense of ownership there, and you want that sense of investment that, like, I have some power, I have some say, I have some sway, I have some ability to influence things. If your player has that feeling, even if it's not something, even if it's not I dictate this and the developers do it, if they feel like they're being listened to, that goes a lot further than basically, if they just feel like, if they make a complaint, if they try to talk to the developers, if they try to talk to the community managers, they're just talking to a wall.
And that's how we got male bunny suits.
Oh yeah, exactly. In Final Fantasy 14, yeah, they created these, kind of stereotypical, lounge bunny suits for female characters, and like, yeah, it was at one of their fan fests, like somebody stand up and ask a question about wanting a male version of that. And of course, everybody kind of like, laughed and, shouted the guy down
Booed
a bit
him
and
off
whatnot.
the stage.
Right, right. But the developers were like, okay, and like, then in the game you see people kind of like running around and guys running around the bunny suit. And it's like, hey, more power to them. Like,
Only took a
that's
year later.
right, right. I mean, well, like it takes a while to kind of do the assets and whatnot. So I mean, they might have had a lot of the basics down, but they still probably had to do a lot of changes.
No,
Um,
I mean it only took a year. I with
right,
with their like limited priority list,
right,
I was shocked.
right, right. But I think another big don't is, like, don't underestimate how much you determine culture as a developer, as a community manager. Like, you are like, there's this careful dance between establishing a good foundation and then adjusting as the community kind of evolves and develops. Because you might have, for example, you might have a game where, you think, okay, it's going to be a very hardcore competitive rating type community, but, like, maybe you have like a burgeoning role playing scene, and so, like, you might have a lot of rules for kind of like determining how people deal with each other as raiders, but then it's like, okay, well, oh, we have this like role playing group, and like, you want to make sure that you're kind of addressing that culture as well as, the other cultures in the game, if it's, it's a significant, number of people in your game. And so, but you really kind of want to make sure you, like you said, you have this good foundation, because people will emulate what they see. They will basically, if they see other people being toxic, if they see other people doing things that, may be harmful to the community, they're going to emulate that. They're not going to, they're not going to have the foresight to think, oh, well, if I'm an asshole to this person, then they're going to be an asshole to somebody else. And that person might be an asshole back to me. Like, if I'm an asshole to other people, they might be assholes back to me. Because people tend to kind of think often very short term, and so it's like, oh, I want, you know, but so they're going to emulate what they see, kind of expecting, well, this is, I'm going to get that, I'm going to give that. And people also do what's rewarded, and as developer, you tend to have your hand on that reward lever, to basically kind of like, give them intrinsic or extrinsic rewards. Having someone come along, having like a community manager come along and say, hey, that was a very respectful, nice post, thank you. It can go a long ways toward basically having other people make more respectful posts on the board, on your forums. And so like I ran into this a bit, on my in Meridian 59, where and this is kind of a natural tendency for developers, I think, where if somebody's complaining, you want to deal with that. You want to say, no, you're wrong. Here, let me provide information to show you why you're wrong. The problem with that, though, is you're giving that person attention, and everybody else sees you're giving that person attention. So if somebody writes a very politely worded, thoughtful post that provides information and gives you a lot of detail, and you don't reply to that, even if it's very important to you, you kind of pay attention to it, and you don't reply to that, but you go over to this person that calls you a fucker and basically start swearing up a storm, and then basically tells you you're stupid, and these game mechanics are broken. If you try to kind of engage with them, explain to them, and try to turn them to your side, people are going to say, oh, well, the developers pay attention to these asshole posts, they kind of ignore the nice posts. I need to make asshole posts in order to get attention. And so that there can be a little bit of intrinsic kind of reward there. Also extrinsic rewards, like say giving people a badge for saying, oh hey, you were really you're a really kind of nice person, or you really help people, so here, let me give you an ambassador badge, or something like that. Like being able to reward people a bit can really kind of help determine that culture. And I think one of the problems that you run into is often is a lot of problems happen kind of when things grow too fast and the culture gets diluted. And again, you can set up a good culture, but then if you have a culture of like X number of people, and then 5X people join all at once, like that initial group is not going to survive. The culture of that group is not going to survive. And as a community manager, you kind of need to realize you're going to have to go in there and establish that culture harder, faster, more emphatically than you would normally. Kind of an example of this from history is this thing that's called the September That Never Ends. This was a big thing kind of in the early internet during the 90s, where you had basically a lot of rules called netiquette, and basically like every September there would be a new group of college freshmen to come in. They would get internet access. They would go on the internet. They would basically act like kids and misbehave. And then you would basically have, but basically it was a small enough group that basically you had the already established people that would basically be able to kind of say, no, don't do that, don't you don't do that, do that, and kind of kind of guide them toward being better members of the community. But about 93, I think, is usually the year that's given.
Yes.
September 93 basically was what kind of like the spike in internet usage, and so there was a lot more people that basically got access to the internet through college, and through services like AOL and whatnot. There was just so many more people that joined that it was hard to maintain that old school community, that old school feeling community. The people could not kind of continue that community, and so you kind of want to pay attention to this type of thing. As a developer, having a whole bunch of people join your game, that's great from a business point of view, because hey, the more people, more likely to spend money. You're probably gonna make more money. But on a community side, you're going to have a lot of problems. And again, I think you can look at probably League of Legends like that, where they probably hit an inflection point, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, there's a whole lot of people here. Then all of a sudden you start getting the toxic potty mouth people that kind of make it a shitty experience.
Yeah, I was actually gonna bring up Riot, since you used them as an example earlier, as having their community be reflective of the standard that the company sets, because they're in so much trouble for having a toxic work environment.
Right. Yeah, I think that yeah. I mean, again, this is kind of where you kind of need to understand how things are going to influence. Yeah, there's been a lot of information in the news. I haven't heard anything more recently, but some months ago, toward the mid to end of last year, there was a lot of news stories talking about Riot basically having a very toxic, bigoted, particularly sexist culture. And like how a lot of kind of female developers really felt like they really didn't have a place in there, and it kind of became a boys' club where the boys would basically kind of like just shit talk each other, um, and a lot of people kind of like like based on what Malcolm said, kind of point out like, oh, this probably reflects back and forth here that kind of a toxic corporate community is reflected in a toxic game community, and then that kind of like it makes it harder, for the community managers to kind of develop, to manage that type of thing when their examples are of this toxic community that's surrounding them. They may not see somebody being toxic in the game as being a problem.
As of June 12th, the state of California had launched an investigation into Riot Games for gender discrimination.
Right. So, I mean, basically, that's kind of more the consequences of what they were doing before. But again, the point is that like that type of environment probably reflects on why you have that type of problem, in the game. Um, Another kind of big don't is don't create drama.
Oh no!
You know,
Here we go.
oh, like I think one of the big things you really need to do is that you really need to kind of handle problems discreetly. Like you want to basically let people know, like you don't necessarily want to hide things. You don't want to make it like if somebody posts up a post full of obscenities and you have no obscenities policy, or somebody posts up something that attacks someone else and in a very you want to remove that, and people will notice that you remove that. You might want to say something. This is kind of why when you say that an issue was noticed and we have dealt with it appropriately. Um, uh, you don't want to make examples of people, because the problem is that if you make a high profile example of people, you create martyrs. And so like if someone agrees with that, like say you have a very kind of competitive PvP game, and you have like two people that are basically sniping each other in the forums, and one person kind of like breaks the rules, is the first person to break the rules, and basically starts using bigoted, hateful language toward the other person, and you punish that person, and the other person, that second person, didn't necessarily might have been might have been on the verge of doing the same thing themselves. But like if you basically come down and there's a ton of breaks on one person and not the other person, and especially if you make them a very public figure, well, anybody who is basically on that person's side in the in-game conflict is going to see them as a martyr and be like, oh, the developers prefer the other team. Obviously, like they're in the pocket and this, that, and the other, and like that really kind of destroys a lot of the trust. And I think that's one of the kind of fundamental things you really want to do. Like you want people to trust you, even if like the ideal is like to have people that would trust you, even if you're even if you're punishing them. If you go to somebody and say, okay, we need to talk about your behavior, the ideal situation here is like for them to go, oh, okay. Yeah, I guess I deserve this. Most people aren't going to be that way. Most people are going to be very defensive and whatnot. But like if you have that reputation of being fair and if you come across someone, they should feel like, okay, well, maybe there's something here, even if I'm going to deny it, rather than just like, oh, of course the developers pick on me. He picks on all the people that he.
I want to be that developer.
Then the game loses interest in people. I mean, because we'll get to horror stories here in a bit, but and the other thing, of course, is like don't hand out power to a select few. Like you want to get kind of investment to people, but like you don't want to give like few people a lot of power, because that tends to kind of really create kind of a hard feeling. Because that creates that kind of creates feelings of favoritism. Kind of going back to like, oh, the developers favor this person. Like, if you give, and again, like this is one of the things where you really, if you're really kind of keyed into your team, into your community, if you're really kind of like, have people to kind of explain things to you, that's one of the things you might say, hey, I want to make this other person operator. People go, oh no, don't do that, because then these other people are gonna feel like you're showing favoritism toward this group and whatnot.
As I look at my mod list.
I mean, I think again, this is like we were talking more on a kind of a professional, like a game developer, list. I mean, when you're doing things on a more individual level, again, like paying people, like getting friends, like if getting friends so you can basically hold bad shit they do over them, or you have kind of like alternative ways of basically kind of enforcing the rules. That's fine. And you're just gonna have favoritism in a smaller group, to be honest. You should, and like you kind of when you start talking about in a more individual group, you want to kind of create a more of a unified group. Whereas professionally, you're kind of dealing with whoever comes and trying to kind of like do the best you can for the largest group of people.